So a couple of days ago, Joe Biden put out an editorial, an op-ed piece in the New York Times, which is fairly unusual. Offhand, I can't recall the last time that happened, that a sitting president put an op-ed in a major newspaper. But anyway, be that as it may, the point is he put out this op-ed and basically was all about Ukraine and how, we stand with Ukraine, blah, blah. And we don't want to expand this war, escalate this war, he says, as of course he goes about explaining how he's going to escalate it. And he's going to escalate it by sending some missile system, that's supposed to be more advanced, another game changer, And so anyway, he talks about this and he reiterates that he doesn't want to escalate. And he has no intention of, America has no intention of removing Vladimir Putin from power in Moscow, which is a bald-faced lie. I mean, both of them are lies. The Americans want to escalate, and they also want to remove Putin from office, because what they want, really, is to break up Russia into smaller pieces and exploit these smaller pieces for their natural resources, which is exactly what they have been doing with Ukraine for the last 30 years. Ukraine is a rich country. It's an exceedingly rich country in terms of natural resources and human resources. They have a very educated, very hardworking population. And yet Ukraine is perennially one of the poorest countries in Europe, if not the poorest countries in Europe. Why is that? Because of the corruption, which is necessary. The corruption is necessary in order to allow for all of the Western corporations and Western politicians to exploit Ukraine for all it's worth. See, that's the thing about corruption. You look at Africa, for instance, there's a very good book about it called Dictatorland. I remember reading it. Very interesting. Africa, the corruption there, that's why it's poor. Corruption is a cancer. And you want to eliminate corruption, not because you want to have a moral society or something like that. No, because the corruption undermines the whole country and brings it down. And Ukraine is an example of that. And what the neocons and the Washington people want to do is they want to break up Russia into smaller pieces that will become, copies of the corruption going on in Ukraine. That's what they want. They say so, It's not like a big secret, okay? And it's not like a conspiracy theory, okay? It's the truth. That's what they want. But of course, Biden says that, everything's said, yeah. Biden says that he doesn't want to escalate with Russia. He wants to be pals with Russia. And, of course, he is going to send these weapons, and he wants Putin to have a long life and a long reign as president of Russia, even though Biden is desperately trying to remove Putin. But anyway, look, it's all bullshit, right? The thing that's clear about these signals that are coming out of the West is, they're talking about these missiles that they're going to send. And they said that, that the Biden administration said that they got a commitment from Zelensky that he promises not to shoot these missiles at Russia or any Russian city, which is just, come on, man. I mean, what? Did you do a pinky swear? I mean, are we, 7 years old on the playground? Come on, okay? So anyway, it doesn't really matter. Because these weapons, they're sending like 4 or 5. They're sending 4 or 5 of these missile launchers. And the missile launchers themselves only throw out like 6 missiles. It's not going to change anything, okay? It's a fig leaf to try to mask the obvious. The Americans have given up on Ukraine. They know that it's a lost cause. They know that the Russians are going to win this. And right now we're in this phase of this conflict that's fairly boring because we're in that slow grind towards Russian victory. The issue becomes, the uncertainty becomes, are the Russians just going to be satisfied with all of eastern Ukraine and all of southern Ukraine, or are they going to try to capture the whole country? I mean, personally, I think that they're going to try to go for the whole country. Yeah, because, I mean, in for a penny, in for a pound kind of situation, right? And what is clear is that the Ukrainian armed forces, the relentless pace of this combat is annihilating them. And, they're falling apart and they're being demoralized at an incredible rate. You know how things are going when, well, no, I'll tell that for another video. But anyway, the point I want to make in this video. The Biden administration in this op-ed, because Joe Biden didn't write the op-ed, it was just a bunch of minions at the State Department and the National Security Council that drew up this op-ed. These people are saying that that only Ukraine can negotiate a solution, a settlement to this situation, to this conflict. Fair enough. But the thing is, that the Ukrainians, the Zelensky regime rather, is saying to Russia that they are only going to start negotiating, when the Russians have retreated from all of Ukraine. That's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. It's very obvious that the Russians intend to keep everything that they have captured and annex it to the Russian Federation. Kherson and Zaporozhye and Donetsk and Lugansk, it's all going to be part of Russia. They're already setting up the bureaucratic machinery, okay? They're already using rubles there. That's in the cards, man. They're never going to leave. And so, the Zelensky regime knows this, so they're being completely disingenuous. They're saying that, we'll negotiate, but you have to withdraw. That's basically saying we're not going to negotiate, but we're going to pretend that we're going to negotiate. That's what it means. And see, this diktat, that they're only going to negotiate if Russia pulls out completely from Ukraine, it's not Zelensky's idea. It's the Washington bureaucrats' idea. They're the ones pulling the strings on Zelensky and his administration and how to fight this war and how to negotiate this war. And they've told Zelensky, your starting negotiating position is all Russian troops must be removed from all of Ukraine, including Crimea, by the way. It's just not going to happen. And so why would the American political establishment tell Zelensky to do such a thing? Because they don't want to negotiate. What they want is for Russia to have to just grind through all of Ukraine, the central part of Ukraine and the western part of Ukraine, just grind through it all the way to the Polish border, inflicting casualties on the Russians and, of course, casualties on the Ukrainians. See? That's the plan of Washington. They have absolutely no intention of stopping this. They just want it to be a continuous grind. And of course, they want to give weapons to partisans, but something that they've discovered early on is that there are no partisans in Ukraine because the parts that the Russians have so far captured are pro-Russian. So there isn't going to be any partisan warfare, like throw the conquerors out. No, like I've said before, the babushka there in Kherson who sees the Russian tank roll in and the Russian tank commander jump out, she looks at him and says, "Oh, what a nice young man. He looks just like my grandson." And could easily be her grandson because she's Russian. Come on, there isn't going to be any partisan warfare in at least not eastern and southern Ukraine, right? Now, in central and western Ukraine, that's where Washington is counting that there will be partisan activity, but here's the problem. You see, the Ukrainian armed forces are going to be so demoralized and broken by the time the Russians get around to central and western Ukraine that they aren't going to put up much of a fight. And so the Russian armed forces are just going to sweep through central and western Ukraine and get right up to the border with Poland. And by the way, at this time, I used to think that maybe Poland would step in. At this time, it's not really clear. I think that Washington got very nervous about the possibility of Polish troops on the ground in Ukraine because they realized very wisely that the Russians, number one, would shoot them right away, would just blow them up with some missiles. I mean, no question, no hesitation. Go whole hog, go, up to 11 on the missile strikes
on the Polish forces, and that would automatically trigger Article 5. Even if the Poles said that they were going in a peacekeeping mission or all kinds of legalese to try to avoid Article 5, it would inevitably trigger Article 5, and there you'd have NATO versus Russia head-to-head, and nobody wants that, and certainly not the United States, because the Americans are scared of the Russians, as they should. The Americans have gotten a good look at what the Russians can do militarily, and they know that the Russians aren't going whole hog on this war. And they're scared of it. They're really scared. And the proof of this is so obvious. The proof is there are no NATO troops in Western Ukraine, at least not in number and not officially. I'm sure there are advisors and little CIA critters running around and all that kind of stuff. But real troops on the ground, they ain't there. And they're not going to be there because, like I said, the Americans and NATO got a good look at the Russians and what the Russians are capable of, and they want no piece of that. Okay? And so the Americans, put out this this op-ed, and it's a lie. And, we're going to keep on with this grind because what the Americans want to do is they want to weaken Russia somehow. And they don't seem to understand that, first of all, the most tragic part is that the people who are going to pay the cost of this are the Ukrainian people. The Ukrainian armed forces are going to die needlessly, and the Ukrainian country is going to be annihilated by this war. Not because the Russians are consciously annihilating it. No, they're not. They're not. That's a lie, okay? What's going on is that, the Zelensky regime is telling their soldiers to hide in schools, hide in hospitals, and the Russians hit them because they're a reasonable military target. And so, the whole country is just going to go to shit. Simple as that. And of course, the other problem too is that the longer this goes on, the more likely all those people who fled Ukraine will never return. Of course not, because they're going to settle in Western Europe, they're going to get a nice job, they're going to do very well for themselves, and they're going to do much better than back in Ukraine, and they're going to have no intention or interest in going back to Ukraine. They're staying there forever. So Ukraine is being hollowed out and destroyed for no other reason than to weaken Russia. And the thing is, anybody with a little bit of common sense would realize that, prolonged combat will, eat up military equipment, Russian military equipment, and also Russian soldiers to an extent. But the longer this goes on, number one, the more politically powerful Putin becomes. Because, every leader who's on the winning side of a war becomes politically more popular. And it's very clear that the Russians are winning this. And so the longer it goes on with these constant, slow-going Russian victories of just chewing up terrain and just eating through the country, the more popular Putin will become in Russia, the less likely he's going to go anywhere, number one. And number two, of course, the longer the war goes on, the more the Russian people become very self-confident, and also the more they come to despise Europe and turn their back on Europe and want nothing to do with Europe. The Russophobia that has been, opened up and spilled out all over the place like vomit across the continent. Well, this is a disaster for the Europeans because, the Russian people are realizing that the Europeans need the Russians much more than the other way around. And so the Russians, they're going to go through a whole, the economic problem and all that. I'm going to do that in a separate video today. But altogether, it's better for the Russians, for the Russian people and for the Kremlin, for the people running things in Russia, for this war to be prolonged, paradoxically, because it just shores up their political position and gives more confidence to the Russian people and more desire to turn away from Europe, to turn away from the West. And so all of these machinations that are going on in the West, insofar as Russia, they're just a complete and utter waste of time and just misguided. I think that's the thing that I find most laughable of all. It's all misguided. They should actually try to negotiate something, but they're not going to. And even if they did, even if Zelensky said, okay, let's do a ceasefire and negotiate, well, the Zelensky regime and the Petro Poroshenko regime before it, they had 8 years to implement the Minsk II agreements. 8 years, and they didn't. And so the Russians are going to say, yeah, sure, we'll stop and, we'll negotiate, we'll keep on talking, but we're not going to do a ceasefire. We're going to keep on fighting because any kind of talk with you, any agreement we come to, and you're just going to turn your back on it like you did with Minsk II. Your word doesn't count. See? So right now, the war is boring because right now it's kind of like going to the inevitability. In a chess match, you see, it's when like one much stronger player is playing against a weaker player. And we're in that middle part, after, 15 moves or so, where it's really clear who's going to win. But what isn't clear is how the end game is going to play out. And the end game, I think that's just a few weeks away. It's going to start when the Zelensky regime forces in eastern Ukraine collapse. And they are going to collapse. Once they collapse, once just military discipline in the east of the country, just, where that part where the Russian forces are basically just eating through them, literally, look at the map. It's like a mouth just chewing through them, right? Once that part gets chewed through and the Zelensky regime forces just collapse, that's the start of the end game. And God knows what will happen there.